Hello, everyone, and welcome to the inaugural Cupertino Mayor's Cup Challenge. And the challenge is really to think about a multifaceted, complex social problem and thinking about it from several perspectives. And so the perspectives that we're bringing to you on panels this morning are going to be having to do with industry. They're going to have to do with science. And then thinking about those couple of topics, we're going to then shift over to policy. And so the difficult problem that we're handling today is sustainability in plastics. And so thank you very much for being here with us this fine Saturday morning on May 14th, 2022 in our brand new Cupertino Library expansion space. I want to thank a few people before we get started. First of all, this inaugural Mayor's Cup Challenge, and I hope that there are more, but of course, there's no set requirement from my perspective. I actually term out of office, and so I really won't even have a voice on the dais in terms of whether a subsequent mayor does it. But I'm very grateful for our city council for unanimously voting to support this event and this initiative and this attempt to look at issues in this kind of a manner. With us today are Councilmember John Willey, and there's John, and thanks for the support. We have Councilmember Kitty Moore, and we have Councilmember Hung Wei. The four of us were actually at a conference recently as well for the League of California Cities. Vice Mayor Liang Chao was set to attend as well as for this set of panels this morning, but she's a bit under the weather, and so we also thank her for supporting this event as well. I'd like to thank our Mayor's Cup committee for helping put this event together. We have John Zarelli from Recology, one of our committee members. We have Claire Verezio, our community librarian for Cupertino, in the corner there. Ursula Sorova took the laboring oar from our city staff. Patrick Ahrens is also a little bit under the weather right now, and I'm going to use that as a little bit of a segue. I contacted Patrick this morning, and yes, he is one of our unfortunate people that has contracted COVID recently. He's okay with sharing that. But in terms of thinking about masks, I wear one all the time, but or I should say I keep one in my back pocket literally all the time. And I kind of keep it self-regulated, but I think it's just really nice to be able to be in a community that has such a high safety rate. Cupertino was one of the very first, I think the first, in fact, in Santa Clara County to have the mask ordinance. Our vaccination rates are very high, and it's quite reflective of our approach. And so, I look out in the audience today, majority masks. I'd like to also introduce our city manager, Jim Troop, at this point. Jim, I'm not going to disclose any medical information for Jim, but I know when Jim coughs, it's actually not a cold. So, these days, these types of self-regulatory mechanisms that we have are often, I think, in a democratic system, kind of a balance of interests and push-pulls. And I think similar to a conversation that I had with a developer at the League of California Cities yesterday, it seems inefficient a lot of the times, but if you think about where you'd rather be in the world, personally, I wouldn't rather be anywhere else. I know it's a lot of work, just like what we're doing here today, right? We're trying to figure out industry tensions. We're trying to figure out where the science is at this point, where the science can eventually take us, what we need to do when we transition over to policy. But it's a real privilege to be able to sit together with everyone and get a sense of where all the various perspectives are and what we can be doing to solve even really intractable problems. And on by the same token, actually, a lot of the stuff that we do aspirationally and amazingly is along the exact same mentality. The fact that we have such inspiration and creativity is all part and parcel of that kind of freedom of expression and thought. So it's really nice to be able to bring this forward. And then finally, on the committee, we had Carrie Young. So thank you, Carrie Young from the Cupertino Library Foundation for helping us plan this event. We have a number of excellent partners for this event, starting with the Santa Clara County Library District, the company Recology, a waste management company in the Bay Area, the Cupertino Library Foundation, Silicon Valley Clean Energy, the Youth Environmental Power Initiative, another organization driven by our students, Silicon Valley Youth Climate Action. We have every single school district that covers Cupertino represented as one of our partners. That includes Foothill De Anza Community College District, the Fremont Union High School District, as well as the Cupertino Union School District. And I think that it is quite fitting that every single school district that covers, public school district, I should say, that covers Cupertino is represented here as one of our partners for today's event, because it's precisely this type of conversation that we would like to have, perhaps not on the most controversial issue of the day, but it's because of the fact that you're looking at these types of problems, you're looking at these types of issues, and hopefully picking something that we can think about calmly and stepwise that can be used as a potential template, we believe, for approaching a lot of the issues that we have. You know, we have a lot of contention in our society today, and a lot of people talk about, oh, why can't we have, you know, more civil discourse? And I completely agree with that. I think that it is very important to recognize the common humanity that people have, but I think it's also very important to understand that what we're doing is, you know, for the purpose of having those conversations, you know, even and perhaps even especially the tougher conversations. And so by picking plastics, it's something that we're all very familiar with, but at the same time, it's something that we can talk to our younger students, what they might be thinking about careers in science, they might be thinking about careers in industry. They might be wanting to join me in my council cohorts and other members of our employees and city staff to work for government in the future or in education. But I think that if we take this type of conversation early, it gives us such a great opportunity and a chance to go forward and go ahead and you know, inspire, have that conversation, and really think about these you know, these pretty tough issues. So the problem here today is plastics, and so where does that lead us? I think of it as just personally kind of culminating recently, of all things, in kind of a home environment situation that I was experiencing. My kids were asking me about this one movie, and it's called The Princess Bride. And if you are familiar with it, you're around my age, I'm 46. Pretty much, you know, everyone in my generation, you know, was all, you know, crazy for it. I have the DVD, and so I try to pop it in to our now antiquated technology DVD player. But before I did that, I took out the DVD box, and what I realized was that over time, the plastic had flaked off. So I took a picture of that with that external plastic, and you can actually see some of the smaller flakes on one or two of my fingers. And it got me to thinking, okay, so this is one DVD case in one household. You know, we think about all the various things that have plastics, and you know, we enacted a plastic bag ordinance, you know, not too long ago, some years back. But what we noticed immediately afterwards was that a lot of those plastic bags were no longer in the creeks. But there are so many things, right? And these are actually very positive things. You know, if you look around us, the chairs that we sit on, this lectern, our name tags, I mean, medical parts, just so many things are positive and are delivered by plastics. And so I think the question then becomes, how do we deal with the waste management stream, the end of life, you know, kind of issues? Because what we often hear, right, is that for this particular problem, there's this, you know, phenomenon of microplastics. It's making its way into, you know, notably our food stream. And one of the examples that have been pretty, I guess, prevalent recently was provided by the Attorney General's Office of California. And I believe it was that the average person ingests a credit card-sized piece of plastic. I thought it was a week. The League of California Cities, one of the panels said per year. But irrespective of whether it's the briefer time frame or the longer one, that's a lot of plastic to be processing and ingesting. So it's something that would be really good. I think we can all agree to try to figure out how do we deal with this issue. And so again, we're looking at this from the perspective of industry. A lot of people think about industry and they have one feeling or the other. But the fact of the matter is, industry, is a lot like plastic. It's pretty ubiquitous. It's a lot like a few of the things, and we can have, I think, a very calm and collective conversation. So at this point, I'm very pleased to introduce our sustainability manager, Andre DeVort. And before Andre comes up, I just want to share the idea that by partaking in this collective exercise together, my hope is that much like the Princess Bride, it's not just about transmitting our fantasies, but transmitting hope and possibility to the future years. Andre, as mentioned previously, is going to be moderating our first panel, and that panel will be on industry. Welcome, Andre.
Thanks so much, Mayor. If I can invite my panelists up, we've got some really wonderful folks here today. We'll start with Jeff Donlevy. Come on up, Jeff. And Jeff is the general manager with Ming's Recycling, based out of the Central Valley. And his organization handles a huge amount of the recycling that happens in Northern California. Also, please join us, Bruce. Bruce Olszewski is a professor in environmental studies faculty at San Jose State and has been thinking about and teaching on these issues for a very, very long time. So we're really pleased to have Bruce. If you could just come join us right here next to Jeff. And then also joining us over Zoom, we have Sally Houghton. Sally is Executive Director of the Plastics Recycling Corporation of California, and she'll have some really great insights for us from the manufacturers and other industry perspectives. So please give a round of applause to our panelists. So as the mayor mentioned, my name is Andre DeVort. I manage the sustainability division here at the city of Cupertino. So we really think about these issues with a lot of depth, and we are increasingly getting questions and having conversations with all of you in the community about this topic of single-use plastics. And so we're just going to dive right in. I want to say thanks to Ursula for organizing and for bringing us in. I think it's going to be a really great conversation. So, really just to kick things off, if each one of you could give a, maybe about 2-minute introduction of yourself, where do you sit in the space, and then we'll dive into some questions after that. So let's start with some real brief introductions, and we'll start here with Jeff. And Jeff, I believe, has a slide that he wants to point out.
Good morning. My name is Jeff Donlevy, General Manager of Ming's Resources in Hayward, part of the Ming's Recycling family. We have 3 facilities in California, and we act as one of the largest processors of material in the state. We handle approximately 35% of all the CRV items that go through the program today. I've also been on the statewide commission for recycling markets. And our focus has been promoting buyback centers and recycling centers because those facilities will generate the cleanest and best material for reclamation. We also work with all the major material recovery facilities, the curbside programs, helping them market their material as well. The one slide that I have just looks at where the recycling centers are in California. With the bottle bill, there's areas that the bottle bill works. There's other areas that have higher cost, such as the Bay Area in Northern California, where there's very few redemption centers. So that's been our focus, is trying to get more redemption centers out there. In Cupertino, there's 8 locations that people can take their CRV containers to. They can go to the CVS, the Sprouts Market, the Walgreens, And then there's an Olin's reverse vending machine that's at the Safeway over on Homestead. So that's our big focus. You'll hear from Nick Lapis on the policy side, but one of the things that the commission helped was with a policy to remove the recycling symbol from a lot of items in the near future, and we'll talk more about that. So happy to be here. Thank you for hosting this.
Thanks, Jeff. Let's go to Sally over on Zoom. Sally, if you could just give us a brief introduction of you and your organization.
Absolutely. So, hi, good morning. Thanks for having me. My name is Sally Horton, and I'm the Executive Director of the Plastic Recycling Corporation of California. That's quite a mouthful, so we tend to just call it PRCC. So who's PRCC? Well, we've been around for about 30 years, and we were a direct result of the bottle bill, which came into existence, I think, in 1987, which is called AB 2020. And at that time, it was legislated that bottle manufacturers and bottle brands who were distributed in the state of California were responsible for their package. And they had to pay a fee, a processing fee, for every bottle that was distributed in the state. And so quite uniquely, in my opinion, I don't know if it would happen today, but quite uniquely, competing brands, competing beverage manufacturers got together and they decided to form an organization, that's PRCC. And their goal is, and it remains to this day, is to try and set up an organization within California that helps promote the recycling of material. And we do that in various ways. Now, why did they form a group? Sorry, I jumped ahead. Why did they form a group? Because there was a financial implication to this legislation. There was this fee, a processing fee, which is the difference between the cost to recycle and the scrap value. And the delta, they pay that delta between that price. So it was a financial incentive for them to be involved. And that's due to the legislation. So PRCC, to this day, we still continue to work across the entire value chain with the recyclers, all the way through to the converters, or we tend to call them reclaimers, those people that take that material. In my case, it is the PET beverage container. That's your beverage drink. When you buy water, when you buy soda, we take that bottle and we track it throughout the entire value chain. We buy it, we sell it, and we make sure that there is a healthy infrastructure, that there are markets. We want to make sure that there are healthy markets here in California to make sure that that material is recycled. So right now, it could be better. Right now, I think the recycling rate for PET beverage containers, those distributed into the state, is roughly around 71%. It has been in the 80s before, but a lot of recycling centers closed down because of lack of funding, and also because of COVID didn't help. A lot were sort of decimated through the whole COVID thing. But at 71%, we continue to make sure that material is moved throughout the entire value chain. So that's what PRCC does. We're a non-profit organization. And we make sure, as this is, they understand about quality, and that we work with legislators to make sure that that there is good, healthy, and sensible policy for recycling here in the state. So that's me, Sally Horton.
Thank you, Sally. Thank you so much. And then let's move over to Bruce. Bruce with San Jose State.
Thank you very much. Well, congratulations to all of you to be a community that's interested in this very serious problem that we have. That's not just local, not just statewide, not just national, but it's a global issue. So about myself, I'm on the environmental studies faculty at San Jose State. I've been there for over 30 years. And I also, so I teach an Introduction to Environmental Issues course. It's a little bit of everything. And I teach a course on globalization and the environment, and I teach a course, the only course in the state of California, on sustainable materials management. So most people would think of it as recycling, but it is sustainable materials management, right? Because that's what we're really trying to achieve. The other thing that I do is I'm the founder and the creator of the official Santa Clara County Recycling Hotline and website. So I created that, and then it is operated with faculty-managed students. So college students, university students come in, and they take your calls about household hazardous waste and basically how to get rid of anything, right? So So we serve all of the cities. All of the cities that approve our budget, they vote on it. And so we serve Santa Clara and San Mateo County. And then those students, after they provide that public service, then graduate and then move on to working with government and industry. So they've worked with Recology, and they've been employed basically by almost every city in Santa Clara County and a bunch of other places too. So, about this issue, one thing that struck me when I looked at the logo here of your city, and so between when this city was founded and now, the population of the planet was 2 billion. Now it's 8, right? Now it's 8, give or take a couple 100,000, right? So, and with globalization, we've had more money being moved around the planet, partly to reduce poverty, but it's also ended up in increased consumption of everything. And then you have, like what our state has done, created laws to encourage recycling, and so we claim that we are diverting about 50%, a little bit more, from our waste stream. However, when that law was passed, about 1989 and now, we've doubled the amount of stuff that we generate, right? So generation is a key problem. And so what's really important is to identify the problems so that we can effectively address solutions. You have to start at the beginning. And our key problem is that we have what's called a linear economy: extract, produce, manufacture, consume, discard, right? So, what we need to do is mimic nature. Plagiarize nature is what I say, and that's closing the loop. And the only way that the loop can be closed is by having those discarded materials made into new materials, right? And so in nature, that's, things die, they convert back into abiotic chemicals, and that recycles. So with us, it's about creating markets. Markets are the key, right? You don't recycle plastics when you put it at the curb. Plastics are recycled when they're made into new things.
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. I'd like to play with that, because that is, I think, a common theme we'll hear throughout the day, is that I think we know the situation here, which is as Bruce mentioned, we're producing a lot more stuff, and a lot of that stuff is being treated as produce, use, and dump. But something that Jeff said earlier, I'd like to pick up on that. You said something about the recycling arrows and that changing. What is that? How has that been guiding consumer behavior around plastics, and what are we doing about it with this legislation?
Yeah, if we go back about 30 years, big Earth Day celebration, big focus on recycling. And everybody's taught at a young age in the schools, recycling is what you got to do. And a lot of the manufacturers started using that as kind of a marketing tool. If you look on your plastic containers, on the bottom, there's a number, and that tells you the type of plastic it is. But it's also surrounded by recycling arrows. And it gives people the thought that is recyclable. Not all plastics are able to be recycled today. There's very few. Your number 1 plastic bottles, your number 2 plastic bottles, they're recycled here in California. They're turning into something new. The others, the story's not so good. But the American Plastic Council is using that recycling symbol almost as a marketing ploy. And I referenced it earlier. There was a Senate Bill 343 that passed, and it's going to take the recycling symbol off of a lot of products, unless it is actually collected at curbside, it's sorted at a facility, and then turned into something new. Only those items will have that recycling symbol. Because whether it's recycling, we won't go into composting, because that's another bigger issue that we're addressing. There are these simple things that the manufacturers are using to help market their material to make you feel good about buying it. It's okay to buy this big plastic item because it has a large recycling symbol. If you look at the bunch of balloons, we can look at those at Costco or Target, and they would have big recycling symbols. all of that is waste. But they have a big recycling symbol saying made from recyclable content or recyclable through certain programs that are very, very small. But they're using that as kind of a marketing tool. We need to get away from that, get people knowledgeable of what actually turns into something new.
That's really interesting, and I think that's just something that's not commonly known. I myself, grew up with curbside recycling, or at least saw that when I was young, move from, put out plastics and aluminum and paper all in its separate containers, and then now into what we have with more of a moving towards single stream. So we're definitely seeing changes over a generational time scale. But Sally mentioned that with the PET market, at least with some types of plastics, she's seeing a 71% diversion from landfill and reuse of those materials. Sally, can you elaborate on that a little bit more? How did we get to what sounds like a success story with those types of materials? And are there lessons for the other types of single-use plastics in our lives?
So it all goes back to legislation. It all goes back to regulation. So AB 2020, as I say, 1987, so 30 years ago, the bottle bill. So the bottle bill, quite a new bill at the time, or a new concept at the time, put the onus back on manufacturers and back on brands in terms of they were responsible. It was going to cost them money if they didn't regulate and consider the recyclability of their material. And having an infrastructure to recycle this material. So the bigger the recycling rate, the less the fee they would have to pay. The higher the value of that scrap, again, the less fee they would have to pay. And so hence PRCC. So we try and make sure, and going back to Jeff's point, markets, we want to make healthy markets. And the PET market here in California is a healthy market. Can be better. It can be a lot better, but it's been around for a long time. And because of its longevity, we have established industries here, Ming's being one of them who Jeff works for. We have a system here, an infrastructure here across the whole value chain that's been around for a while. When I first started back, 15 years ago, there was really only one reclaimer. That's a converter, a person who takes the bottles and converts them into something else. Now we have 6 here in the state, which is really a success story, because what it means is it keeps the material here in California. We're not shipping it export. There's very little material, particularly PET, very little PET that ever gets exported. In fact, it's difficult now to export any material, A, because of cost, and B, because of the supply chain issues that we're having. Try and get a container, you might as well try and find Aztec gold right now. It's pretty difficult. So goes to markets, it goes to legislation, and just recently, this year actually, California passed its first mandated content law, which means that every package, every bottle, every beverage container that is distributed in the state has to have a percentage of recycled material in it. Right now it's 15%, it's going to go up to 25%, then up to 50% in a few years. So why is that important? That's significant because it builds that pull-through market. It means that there's going to be a demand for that recycled material, regardless of, and this is what this is what the industry has always had to struggle with, the virgin price. And by virgin, I mean that the virgin raw material has always been a cheaper option, or not always been a cheaper option, but it's been a much more plentiful option. And so manufacturers have gone for the virgin. But now, because of legislation, it doesn't matter how much a virgin costs, they have to meet those mandated goals, which means they have to use recycled material. So we have a pretty established market here in California, an established industry, and I think that has helped. But legislation, regulation, sensible regulation has helped. What we do need is more material. We have the capacity here. We have those 6 reclaimers. What we need is more collection. And that I'm sure Jeff will talk to more about how a lot of the recycling centers here in California have been decimated, and we need to build those back up again through greater investment would be one of those from Cal Recycle and so on. But I've talked enough, so I'll let someone else talk.
Yeah,
unless you have any questions.
Jeff,
about what I
if you could just elaborate on that a little bit, and then I have a question for Bruce to get more into talking about other materials outside of what we currently do curbside. But could you just expand on what Sally mentioned about, how can we improve in this particular market with the types of plastics that are ubiquitous and being upcycled? And how can we make that even better?
Yeah, one of the keys to the recycling rate and the redemption rate, turning it into new material, has been the deposit that people have put on the product. This has a 10-cent deposit, smaller bottles are a nickel. So that pays for the operators at the recycling centers to handle it, but it also provides an incentive for the curbside programs to collect it and extract it. So these PET bottles, your number 2 bottles, aluminum cans, glass bottles, those have a value to them to pay for the collection and recycling, whether it's through a recycling center or a curbside collection program. The other plastics, your 3 through 7s, they just don't have that value to pay for, especially the collection through curbside programs. And it's created cross-contamination, which increases costs for the curbside programs. So the best incentive is the deposit, and then the availability of recycling centers where residents and consumers can participate in the process and take them back. That really accelerates the recycling rate and generates that cleaner, better material. So then the curbside programs don't have the contamination rates, and they can focus on clean fiber, mixed paper, cardboard, and the other items that they can get through the curbside program.
So for those people listening at home, just real quickly, I think this is more widely known now, but what are the keys to successful recycling at home, and making sure that your own household waste is that clean and able to be used?
Avoid it being wet is one of the things I would say. Keep it dry.
Okay, dry, and then keep your food waste out, right? That's another one I've heard.
Yeah, knowing what your local program is, knowing where your local recycling center is, and knowing what your curbside program accepts. And again, just because it has a recycling symbol doesn't mean it goes in the curbside bin. Understand what your local program accepts, and everybody wants it clean and dry. Because if it's smeared with peanut butter, pasta sauce, if it's the salad dressing from the clamshells or the PET trays that you might have, that will ultimately get rejected and thrown out somewhere along the line. So clean and dry is what everybody likes.
Okay, so that's our. Yeah, please do, Bruce, and then I want to
Yeah, I'll
expand
just
on
add to that by saying that recycling is often hard because people have problems understanding what you can and can't recycle. In my own house, I've seen problems, right? And there's nobody who knows this better than me. You can just go to our website, and no matter what city you live in, and you can find out what you can recycle in your city. That's why we exist. Recyclestuff.org, right? You have stuff, you want to figure out how to recycle it, you go to our website. That's why the cities fund us. The speakers today are exactly right. Just keep it clean, find out what goes in the recycling bin, you're good. And don't put those pizza boxes in there.
Yeah.
And the big question.
Yeah. So we have about 10 more minutes. I'd like to talk about some other types of materials, and we're really just trying to inform the next 2 panels here, where we'll be getting into more depth about new types of technology and then what kind of policies we can explore. But Bruce, you talked a little bit earlier about this concept of the circular economy. I think that's a really important concept to elaborate on a little bit. But also, I was listening to a podcast this morning, and one of the speakers talked about this concept of path dependency and kind of lock-in. And the example that they gave was the QWERTY keyboard. The way our keyboards are arranged on computers, QWERTY, it's just a fluke of history, and yet we're still using that convention today, 100 years later. So Bruce, the question to you and the rest of the panelists is are we locked into just using single-use plastics? Is it just the way of our life now? Or how are we moving more towards more of a circular thought around this?
Oh, that's a good question. Yes, we will continue to have and use single-use plastics. That's just going to be happening. And so why is that? Because why do we have plastics? Because they are very cost efficient. It doesn't cost much to manufacture it. It can be formed into many different things. And interesting enough that it has much less environmental impact than manufacturing paper. So you would think that paper has less environmental impact, but that's just not true. My students actually have, it's an exam question where they have to do the numbers, right? So,
Taking notes.
then we get into this like, okay, so plastic can be a very efficient packaging material because it protects products very well, and so that means that you don't have damage to the product, which means those things don't get wasted. Things that are packaged last longer, so you don't have to throw those things away because they pass an expiration date. Candy bars and stuff like that, right? So plastics there's no doubt that they play a really great role environmentally, right? The problem is end of life, right? What happens when the bread bag is discarded? What happens when the QWERTY keyboard has to be discarded because your keyboard is plastic, right? Well, the industry, as Jeff pointed out, came out with this numbering system mostly to try to create an image for themselves. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? Well, the market's pretty good it's excellent for 1, it's pretty good for number 2, and the rest of them are not very good. And number 7 is a complete fallacy because, I mean, it's just no other way to explain it. 7 means everything else. And there are hundreds of types of plastics. Yet still today, we have cities that say that put number 7 in your curbside bin. This is profoundly wrong, right? They should not be doing that. And so it promotes a myth, right? So in terms of the single-use plastics, there are other countries who have done things about this. So in Germany, the dual system Deutschland, or it's also known as the green dot, right? Essentially what Germany identified is that they had a garbage problem. Then they looked at it and they go, the number one material or product type we have is packaging. The exact same situation we have here. Packaging is the number one product type that is being discarded. So then what Germany said is that, you know what? This is not going to be our problem. It's going to be the problem of the manufacturers. They're the ones who will have to take this stuff back. Let them figure it out. Because there's all this discussion about what kind of technology and this and that. And they're just like, no, you created the problem. You figure it out. And so in California, I think that that's where we're going to be moving with single-use plastics. There is no other alternative, frankly. And so the idea is simply, I'll make it real simple. You make it, you take it. Right? You make it, you take it. And then they make the solutions, they create new industry, they end up reducing negative impacts. Will there still be some plastic waste and litter? Yeah, there will be. But what we know from AB 2020 that created the bottle bill is that once you put a price on things, the amount of that stuff being littered drastically reduced, right? So if you put an economic value on something, then it gets into the circular economy. And the circular economy simply mimics how nature works. So every resource, everything that we consume will eventually become either a resource or a pollutant. According to nature, there are no other alternatives, right? There is none, right? So it's a resource or a pollutant, and it's a policy decision and the implementation of that policy.
Yeah, and with that, we're seeing trends around the world where the manufacturers are starting to take responsibility. This clear PET bottle will become a new clear PET bottle, most likely in California. This green PET bottle will not become a new bottle because of the pigment in the bottle. It might become a carpet backing, it might become a carpet fiber, but it will not become a new bottle. It would be nice if manufacturers in the United States would switch to all clear. In Japan, South Korea, there's countries around the world where the manufacturers have switched to all clear because it is more circular than a pigmented green container. So it's starting to happen a little bit slowly. I would like to see the manufacturers take on that responsibility proactively rather than go the legislative route, which is more complex. Then we start talking about bans and things like that. But I think the manufacturers, like you said, if you make it, you take it. The PRCC group has really developed an infrastructure here in California that has created that circular economy, especially for the clear PET bottles and the number 2 bottles. We'd like to see that expand, and then have the manufacturers have some more proactive approach, switching some of their products that are not being recycled as actively as others.
Yeah, no, I'm going to agree with both the gentlemen in that, we are seeing manufacturers more taking responsibility. We've got the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, we've got the US Plastipack, which is a domestic equivalent, which are holding manufacturers more accountable. Once those manufacturers, the big names, sign up for it, they are being, I'd say, looked at what they are doing, how they're performing, and being held accountable. I think that's a good thing. Legislation, regulation, and legislation also is having some impact on that. Design for recyclability, that's a big thing, especially PRCC and APR, which is the national plastic recycling organization, has done a lot with design for recyclability. To Jeff's point, things like green bottles or brown bottles or things like that really are hard to recycle. There are markets, but they're low grade, low price. It doesn't have much value on the bottle. We're seeing manufacturers changing that. There's now, I believe, Sprite bottles in other parts of the world that are now clear. So again, we are moving in the right direction for certain plastics. My own, the one that the silo that I am, PET, I feel we've got a long way to go still, but we're moving in the right direction. There's investment. We can see technology also has expanded and is growing, and there's a lot of investment in that too. But to your point, there are other plastics where either the collection is not there, and if you don't have collection, you're not going to have value. Why would you invest in something if there is very little of it? And so that's what we need to see. We need to see a design for every package that is recyclable, and we need to see it collected in order to have those pull-through markets.
Thank you. Bruce, you want to
Yeah, it was so good to
one
hear.
more minute? Take us home.
Yeah, it was great to hear that, the mention of legs and regs. What that means is legislation and regulation, right? And so what industry does, if they want to avoid legislation and regulation, then they change their behavior. So all you young people out there, if you don't want to get in trouble, then change your behavior, right? So we all learn that over time. And so some industry is catching on to that. What's kind of nice is that, and I'm glad you brought up the different colors of the bottles, because you can go home and you can drink a beer out of a dark bottle and feel good about it because it is recycled glass, right? So do yourself a favor, support recycling by drinking beer.
Or I would suggest drinking wine from a bottle instead of a bag or a box.
There you go. Yeah. It's the environmental thing to do.
But not with metal rings on it, please. Not any wine with metal.
So the point I'm trying to make is that there's a market for that type of material, and industry has responded, and so that does take away a little bit of the pressure that they worry about is being legislated, right? And so, for those of you that are younger and you're thinking about careers and where you're going to go, you can think about design for the environment. How do you design products and packaging that is recyclable and made of recycled material, right? Those would be critical contributions you make to society and yourselves.
And I would just add, find out what gets recycled in California, what gets recycled in the United States versus export. All the aluminum cans are staying in the United States, all the tin cans, all the glass bottles are staying in California. The PET bottles and the number 2 bottles are staying in California. That's what we need to promote. What can be recycled and create jobs locally and in the U.S.
Can I say the same about LDPE as well? A lot of plastic bags, if they're good, clear plastic bags, they are also being recycled here and converted. So we're doing a good job. I know there's ordinances on that, but plastic bags, if you take them back to your grocery store in another bag, they are being recycled.
I did not know that. Well, that's great. So hopefully this has been a good overview of where we are, kind of a status of single-use plastics and what's working and where we still need to go. And that's really what we wanted to set up here with our first panel. So really looking forward to hearing from our other speakers about technologies and policies being looked at in this space. And we really thank you. Thanks to our speakers.
Thank you, Andre, and the industry panel. That was such a fascinating discussion. And I'm really happy to be leading our second discussion, which is going to be on science and technology. First, I wanted to introduce myself. My name is Carrie Young. I'm a board member for Cupertino Library Foundation. Similarly to what Mayor Paul had mentioned, on the basis in the of the discussion engagement from our community, Cupertino is very special in terms of that the engagement from our community truly has no bounds in terms of the age and demographics. And it's evident to see the attendees from today, and it is definitely one of the areas that Cupertino Library Foundation focuses a lot on. Every year we have a flagship program called Super Summer Science Search, in which we engage middle school students to help solve a big problem. With the help of Mayor Paul and Mayor's office, plastics challenge was one of our prompts in 2021. And even in the room that we're sitting in here today, we had engaged our middle school students to help us design a perfect program room they would like to see back in 2019. So it's very fitting that we're having this discussion today and with so many young voices from our audience about today's discussion. We have a very awesome panel today for our science and technology. I'm going to start going from this direction. We've got Dr. Corinne Scown, who is a Deputy Division Director of Research in Energy Analysis and Environmental Impact Division. Her specific expertise involves in scenario analysis, infrastructure modeling, uncertainty quantification, environmental life cycle assessment, and transportation energy. Second, we have Joey Schmidt, who is the project director for Action Research, which is a firm that helps translate academic research on energy conservation and recycling into real-world applications. Joey is also an expert in looking at behavioral changes. So great segue from our prior panel. He will be sharing a little bit of that with us today. And we've got Jeff Dobert, who is the Director of Operations for Bay County Smart Station, which is providing comprehensive recycling stations for Los Altos, Sunnyvale, and Mountain View, which serves over 300,000 residents. So thank you all for being here today. I'm really excited for our discussion today. So maybe to kick it off, I would love to maybe ask our panelists to just give us maybe 1 or 2 minutes to introduce yourself.
Sure, hi. So I'm a staff scientist at Lawrence Berkeley Lab, and I'm an engineer by training. I did all my degrees in civil and environmental engineering, and I have a special program called Engineering and Public Policy. And almost a decade ago, I got involved in research related to waste management. We actually got a grant from the California Energy Commission to work with a facility not too far from here in San Jose, a zero waste energy development company. So they were doing dry anaerobic digestion of mixed organic waste from the surrounding communities. And one of the things that really struck me, and I showed pictures to my other panelists when we were hanging out before we sat down, is just the sheer quantity of plastic waste that was contaminating the stuff coming into ZWED, right? They didn't want it there, but the number of plastic bags that showed up at their door was incredible. And you know, I got kind of motivated to think about the plastic waste problem. What can we do to divert this waste so it's not contaminating other streams that we can get some value out of? And we also want to be able to divert that stuff from landfill, make sure it doesn't leak into the environment. And so that's kind of how we got started on plastic waste. In the research that I do at Lawrence Berkeley Lab, we focus on kind of novel recycling technologies, developing polymers that either break down more easily in anaerobic digesters or composting operations, or that are easier to break down in a sort of relatively environmentally benign recycling process that's different than just the kind of mechanical recycling process, which, you know, as we talked about earlier, can be really challenging because you can't separate out things like dyes, fillers, other additives. Right, so developing new recycling processes that allow us to get that stuff out so we have something closer to virgin material is one of those important technological solutions that we work on at the lab. So my group does a lot of computer modeling, and then we partner up with folks who are doing stuff empirically in the lab and taking measurements out in the field. And our goal really is to kind of connect up the basic science with the very practical side of like, how are we going to roll this stuff out? What things make sense to commercialize, and where are the gaps in our infrastructure that we need to fill through kind of targeted investments, that sort of thing.
Awesome. And Joey?
Yeah, so I'm a project director at Action Research, and we focus on behavior change. So we work in a variety of industries, so recycling, composting, energy, water, stormwater, pollution prevention, various different things like that. My background is in psychology with a focus on experimental psychology in the social science realm. And everything that we've been talking about today has some sort of behavioral aspect. So everybody pretty much knows that recycling is important, but if you're telling people recycle plastics, they know that, but there's so many ways to break that down, and each different type of plastic that we've been talking about has a different behavior associated with it. So for example, recycling bottles at a curbside is different from recycling bottles at one of those vending machines that you put them in. Recycling peanut butter jars is different than bottles because you really got to get in there and clean it out. And it's also different for recycling those soft plastics, the grocery bags, the produce bags, because you have to take those somewhere. You have to take them to the grocery store, somewhere that it will collect them. And at all of those different stages, there's different barriers and benefits associated with each of those behaviors. So we use a process called community-based social marketing. And it's a research-based process that kind of looks at very specific behaviors. So you get down from that high level recycle, and you get really focused. Recycle soft plastics at your local grocery store. Then you do some research, see what's out there. You talk to people, you talk to your community, and you figure out what are the barriers and benefits to that specific action that you want them to engage in. So I don't have transportation to the grocery store. I forget. I don't have somewhere to keep all these plastic bags. I don't know which kinds of bags are recyclable, because knowledge and awareness is shown over and over to not be enough. So you really need to dig deep and find out those specifics about each behavior. Then once you've got those identified, you start developing strategies to develop a program to actually get people to do the behavior you want them to do. So those tools come from the social and behavioral sciences. There's all different kinds that address different barriers that you might encounter. So I forget. You need to potentially use a prompt to remind people. I don't know. You need to use vivid communication to tell them what to do. You can use social norms to say, most people value clean creeks because the plastics end up there, so you need to take them into the right place. Then once you've got some solid strategies based in science, then you pilot test on a small scale to see what's working and what doesn't, and then you evaluate. And then if it's successful, you can roll it out community-wide. So that's a high-level overview of what I do.
Thank you. And then Jeff?
Morning, I'm Jeff Dobert. I work for the Sunnyvale Material and Recovery Transfer Station in Sunnyvale, and we're also known as the Smart Station. I just want to thank you guys for having me on today. I want to thank Ursula, Carrie, council members, Vice Mayor, Mayor. There's a lot of big names today, and it was actually quite an honor to be included with those names. I'm on the operations side. I've been with the Smart Station for about since 2007, and really, I'm here to talk about what we do there, and overall at any of our facilities, sister companies, what we do to really keep the plastics out of the landfill. There's a lot of technology coming online that really helps the efficiency of how we run these facilities. It goes hand in hand with what everybody who's talking here today. I think we're kind of the end of the line there. So I'm going to spend some time today talking about what the end users do with the material and what we do to get it to them. I look forward to answering all the questions that Carrie has, and yeah, given any input and insight that I have on the operations side.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for all of your introductions. And it wouldn't be a science and technology panel without talking about innovations and discoveries. So I would love to just kind of hear maybe from you, from your respective area, what are some of the really recent discoveries or innovations that excites you the most right now?
Sure. Well, the technology for recycling plastics that have historically been really difficult to recycle, right? We talked about how ones and twos, right? That's PET, polyethylene terephthalate, and HDPE, high density polyethylene, are the two resins that regularly get recycled. Just for context, like as a fraction of total plastics in the US, the number previously that we were all operating on was about 9% of plastics get recycled. I think the updated number is more like 6%. So it's gone down. And the reality is that there are, those two plastics, like PET, is probably the most attractive one to recycle, is, it's not that big of a fraction of all the plastics that we use. We use things like polypropylene. Pay attention to the packaging that you get the next time you get takeout, right? There's probably some combination of polypropylene, low density polyethylene, LDPE. Those are super common too. Polyurethane gets used a lot. It's probably in these chairs. And so, we have to come up with processes where we can effectively recycle more of this material into something that's valuable and useful again. So in some cases that can mean depolymerizing stuff. You've probably seen news stories, if you follow this topic at all, on like pyrolysis, right? And this is basically heating up the material, but you're doing it in an oxygen limited environment. So you're not burning it. You end up turning it into some combination of a liquid fraction, a gaseous fraction, and a solid fraction called char. And you're trying to maximize the liquid fraction. And that can go into a petrochemical facility. So you'll get some naphtha. The problem with pyrolysis is that you are basically going back to the beginning, where you then have to redo the most energy intensive step to produce plastics, which is the naphtha cracker, turning naphtha into ethylene so that you can then make these polymers again. Right, so pyrolysis, you can handle a mixed stream. That's probably a good option for some of these kind of mixed waste streams that are just too difficult to further separate because of the form factors or whatever. There are other really interesting technologies for depolymerizing plastics back to monomers. PETase is a great one, right? Enzymes. Biology will find a way, right? We've produced so much plastic waste and kept it in landfills for long enough that organisms started figuring out how to eat it. And so now we can harness the enzymes that those organisms made. I think it was first developed at discovered at a landfill in Japan. We can use those enzymes to depolymerize the plastic, with cutting the microbes out of the loop entirely, right? Just use the enzymes. You can also take those enzymes and start to embed them in the plastic. So that basically when they get to the right condition, the right temperature, exposure to water, they can break down easily. And so there are ways that we can get plastics that break down more quickly in a composting operation, right? You do this with PLA, polycaprolactam, PCL. And then there are all kinds of other kind of solvent-assisted processes that can get us to polymer chains or monomers and make it easier to get some of the additives and the dyes out and get something that we can use again as if it's a sort of virgin material. So there's a lot of cool stuff going on.
Does anyone want to jump in?
Sure. So in terms of behaviors, there's some interesting research on habit formation and trying to chain different habits together to make a new behavior become more successful. So some interesting stuff about habits. If you're trying to get people to engage in something new, you want to associate it with something that they're already doing. So, for example, if you're trying to get somebody to floss more, if you're a dentist, you want them to start flossing after they've already brushed their teeth, because that is kind of next steps in the chain versus getting them to floss first, because they're more likely to forget and not actually engage in that behavior. Then there's also some interesting work in terms of social norms. So a lot of times you see a lot of campaigns that really highlight the wrong thing. They clearly don't have social scientists on their panels, because they'll say, look at all of this trash in the creek. Look at all of this trash over here. But you really need to be highlighting the positive social norm. You really need to show most people value recycling properly. There's very little contamination, things like that. But depending on your behavior, that's not always the case. So if it's a new behavior, not everybody's doing it. Not everybody knows about it. So there's some interesting work in the realm of social norms with what's called trending or dynamic norms. So you can still highlight the low amount of engagement in it, but you can highlight it as a trend. So every day, more and more people are recycling this thing properly, and it's being shown to be effective, even if the overall majority isn't in your favor yet.
Yeah, what these two are talking about is possibly the most important part of recycling. The behavior is it how we teach our residents, how we teach our kids how to recycle, what to recycle. I mean, that is, more important than what even I do. It starts there. I try to do our best and to be as efficient as possible at running a facility that keeps plastic out of a landfill. But what they're talking about is where it starts. I'm dealing with a lot of new technology that the industry is trying to come up with. As far as how efficient are our transfer stations? How efficient are our facilities to keeping recyclables out of a landfill? A lot of people might, you see the videos, you go to facilities, you take the tours. They look great. It looks efficient. I think we are very inefficient at the moment. I think a lot of facilities are starting to make the move. They're starting to renovate and make the modifications to add in automation and try to get better diversion out of it. That's what we're trying to do, at least at our facility and at other facilities of ours. We're trying to implement robotics. We're trying to implement optical sorters. Those two go hand in hand. I think you can't have one without having the other. Now, optical sorters have been around for a lot longer, and I think where they're going is more artificial intelligent AI vision systems. Those are now starting to be integrated into it, so you have a much more accurate identification of the recyclable as it's going along the line. We still are going to use manual sorters, but I think what you're going to see in the next 3 to 5 years, probably closer to 5 years, is you're going to have a lot of robotics in there that work hand in hand with the optical sorters. Part of what's going to go with that is our facilities, and I know for our facility in Sunnyvale is something that we're looking in the next 5 years is to renovate it, and it's how you apply all these new technologies. You can throw them in there, do a one pass, one loop, and then send everything that you don't get out to a landfill. I think you're going to see a lot more of this technology, the opticals, the robotics, screening. You're going to start seeing a looping system. You can run these facilities at a slower pace, less burden depth. You're going to start missing a lot more of what's recyclable. So for us, we can only do so much. We can pull everything out. The goal is someday to get so efficient that we're pulling every piece of plastic out. It's all about the end user. What kind of end users, can recycle this? That's going to go directly into more innovation. It's going to be interesting to see where we go. But I see a big factor is going to be those opticals and those robotics for us. I think how we apply them is going to be key on what we can keep out of those landfills.
Yeah, thank you. And I think one of the common threads I'm hearing is looking at pattern analysis and looking at metrics and numbers. And so maybe I'll start with Dr. Scown, because I know in a lot of your research papers, you've mentioned a lot about techno-economic analysis, which you're looking at, it's an approach looking at conducting process design simulations, and that's based on empirical data. So it's entirely data-driven. And you've also looked at life cycles of a lot of different materials, or even electric trucking and things. So by utilizing ML data, right, machine learning. So from a top level perspective, does that help you inform maybe on the most simplistic level, like, where are the low hanging fruit of where we could approach this issue?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we were chatting about casually before we sat down here today was, the idea of kind of prioritizing what you're going to pull out of your stream based on the kind of value that you're going to get out of it, right? Everything has an opportunity cost. If you devote space in your facility to pulling out one kind of material, then you can't use that space for something else. And so what we'll try to do, at least in my group, is, and we've actually worked with equipment manufacturers who supply the equipment to MRFs, is we'll try to build up a kind of virtual MRF to simulate like how much you're going to be able to recover of different kinds of material for a particular setup. And one of the things that we zeroed in on actually was this issue with optical sorters and being able to separate PET from PLA, right? You really want to get the PET out. That's one of the more sort of easily recyclable plastics. But those bales have to be really, really pure. I was actually like shocked by how stringent the requirements are for like the allowable amount of contamination. What is it in a PET bale? Like how much contamination can you have in there? Is it like 1%, sub 1%?
Yeah, if you're talking about 1%, close to
Yeah.
1%, if you
Yeah.
really want the top quality bale. And then from
Yeah.
there, you're talking, I hear different things all the time. This is where I've dealt with Jeff Donlevy a lot, and he's taught me a lot about this over the years. Is 5%, 10%. It kind of fluctuates a little bit, but yeah, when that goes down to like a B grade almost, and so I think these PET manufacturers, when they're taking it in, they want 1%. It's just a matter of when are they going to really force that on us, and that's really when it's going to put us in a bind.
Yeah, I mean, and so it would be interesting to connect that up with the behavioral side of things to figure out what either behavioral nudges or technological fixes we can employ to make sure that of the stuff that does have value that we can pull out, that we basically don't shoot ourselves in the foot by ending up with contamination that lowers the value of the material and makes it unacceptable. So in the case of the sort of PLA contamination issue, we started thinking about like novel ways that you could downstream separate PLA out and actually recover that separately from the PET if you end up with too much of it in there, because the optical sorters some of the lower resolution optical sorters have a difficult time sort of differentiating between the two. Their signatures look really similar. I mean, all of these things, like especially when we talk about like extended producer responsibility, which I know it's a really attractive option. We do have to take into account, like, well, what does that actually look like? If you're going to have a massive take-back program and you're going to ship the sort of used packages back to some centralized facility, I mean, that is going to involve more transportation, right? Like, you have to kind of expand your system boundaries to make sure you're taking into account the additional truck trips that are associated with taking the material back. And how does that compare to the kind of baseline infrastructure that we have now? So I think these are the things that are, just making sure that we understand kind of what this alternative solution would look like, not just in terms of how much material can we divert from landfills, but like what are the other implications that we're also looking at. It'll help us make more informed choices about kind of where we want to put our resources to solve this problem.
Yeah. And this is, again, the perfect segue, right? We have our policy panels after this. And so this is a really great discussion point. So then how do we bring some of these discussions on maybe changing the different levels of requirement? Is that on the policy level, or Joey, in terms of like behavioral changes, how do we bring this into the industry? Is that from a policy perspective, or from your thoughts, like how do we bridge that?
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to make any policy changes, you're going to need people to engage with them properly. So talking to people and figuring out their understanding of whatever change is going to be made is going to be really important, because otherwise you're going to end up with a lot of contamination issues or different problems. So setting up programs right from the beginning is going to be really key.
Yeah, it's tough. We can talk about legislation all day. California especially, it's legislation over the last 5 years. I mean, it's skyrocketed. I'm part of a legislative committee on a coalition that, our once a month meeting went from 10, 11, 12 different legislations that we were talking about. Now we've got a list of 40 or 45, and we were discussing this before, that my head explodes. I can't keep up with it all. It's so hard to really understand all the legislation that they're pushing through. And I mean, there really is only one way to do it. Yeah, they can pass all they want, but it goes back to residents. It goes back to, everybody who's trying to recycle, and we got to get out to them and explain why is this happening. And 1383 organics out of a landfill. A lot of people don't understand that, and a lot of the regular residents out there don't fully understand why their bill's going up. And it's getting people out there. The cities do a great job on hiring folks to go out there and try to educate everybody. And so that's the key. That's where it starts.
And we're almost at time, so maybe I'll just ask one final question. As we're wrapping up today, what is it for the science and technology panel? What is one thing that you hope that people can take away from our chat? I know it's not an easy question.
Let's see. Don't wish cycle. I'm gonna steal your thunder. Put your clear, rigid, three-dimensional, no flat like film plastics. Put those in the recycle bin. I still don't know if I should just, if I have a peanut butter jar, just like spend all this effort cleaning it out. Maybe I should just put it in the trash. But yeah, I think there's reason to be hopeful. Don't wish cycle is really the one thing. I'll leave it at that.
For me, I would say that understanding that behavior matters. Everything has some sort of a behavioral component. So designing your programs appropriately from the start to take behavior into account is really important. Yeah,
I want to say educate yourselves. It starts at our schools. It starts with our kids. I would like to say that one, but I'll keep it on the technology side of things and just, the industry is it's ever changing right now. It is as active as it's ever been, and just know that we're doing everything we can. We're working with our cities very hard to come up with new technology, whether that's opticals, whether that's vision systems that can read everything coming across our belts, or for kids out there who probably find this more interesting, we are coming up with robotics that can help us sort all of this material out. So we're doing a lot as an industry, and there's a lot of people out there that I talk to improve the efficiency of our facilities that recycle all of this material. And and then from there, a whole nother topic that we can go on for hours is transporting and exporting and getting the material that we recover where it needs to go. But yeah, technology, we're getting there. We're getting there.
Well, and for the students, for the students, I would say, this is a great opportunity to find a way to do a class project on this if you're interested. There are always cool internships, opportunities to get involved in research. So search around. I'm sure all of us would be happy to, if you want to reach out, we're easy to find on the internet. But get involved early. It's never too early.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. And I had mentioned earlier that we had an S4 project in 2021, which will be featured during lunch. So definitely watch out for that. That will be coming up just shortly. With that, I really wanted to thank all of our panelists today for our science and technology panel. Certainly big problems that we are facing, but we're hopeful that the technology is catching up and hopefully propelling us to kind of address the issues. So thank you very much.
Thanks a lot for being here again this morning. I think it's just been an incredible set of conversations that we've had so far between the industry panel and the science and technology panel. The only thing that I lament is that we only have half an hour. So there's no way you're going to basically cover all of industry or all of science or technology or even a significant portion of it, frankly. But at least we can get that conversation started. And so we're very happy to be able to introduce our policy panel last. The idea behind it again is to sit and listen. A lot of the civic service and a democratic process is to hear what the tensions are. Let's hear where industry is coming from. And for those of you very vested in this issue, you do hear the industry representative, Sally Houghton was a great representative of industry, but at the same time, you kind of understand that industry comes from a business perspective, right? It's out to try to capitalize on the dollar. How do we work with that? Do we put cards on the table and basically say, hey, we understand that there's an economic incentive, or when we're trying to work on it, do we basically set up a paradigm where it's kind of like, okay, we're going to legislate our way out of this. We're going to make these types of things get cleaner. And we have behavioral scientists here today, and people in that industry, and thinking about, okay, how do we really think about how people actually behave, right? The study of economics was all about Adam Smith premising it on the idea that people are selfish, right? It is maybe a couple centuries back at this point. But the behavioral economics, they're kind of thinking, how do people actually behave? So this is really interesting that we're able to kind of connect the science, so we connect the industry and their motivations and the behavior. Of course, industry is not just about outputting, it's also about waste management as well. And so we are very pleased to be able to have a significant component of that as part of our event here today. For the policy component of the conversation, I'm going to briefly introduce our people here on panel and ask them to provide their own self-introduction. Please feel free to be as elaborate as you like or superficial as you like with regard to your self-intro within the paradigm of a couple of minutes. And so our first panelist here on my left is Nick Lapis. He's with Californians Against Waste, the Director of Advocacy. To Nick's left is Obai Rambo, who is with Recology and is the Director of Government Relations. On the other side of the screen is my colleague at the City of Cupertino, Ursula Sorova, who is the Environmental Programs Manager. And then finally, to Ursula's left is Dr. Lloyd Holmes, who is the President of De Anza College. And so let's start with Nick on the self-introductions. Welcome, Nick.
Sure, thank you for having me. As the mayor said, my name is Nick Lapis. I'm with Californians Against Waste. It's a little echoey. So we're an environmental organization based in Sacramento. We work on policy development, lobbying. More or less, if you've heard about a recycling law over the past 40 years, it's something that our organization either developed or worked to implement. So everything from the bottle bill originally to more recently the organic waste legislation, the plastics legislation.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Obai Rambo. I am the new director of government relations at Recology. I've been here for about 8 months, and I feel that my new subtitle is probably going to be Captain Planet. Been enjoying my time here so far. And Recology is a waste management organization based in Northern California. We've been in San Francisco since the 1930s, and we have expanded into Washington State, Oregon, and also all the way down through the coast and the inland part of our state. Prior to my work with Recology, I've also served about 12, 13 years at local, state, and federal government, with my most recent experience with now our Vice President, Kamala Harris.
Thanks, Obai. And next we have Ursula.
Great. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out. This has been great. I am Ursula Sorova, the Environmental Programs Manager for City of Cupertino. We do both the waste side, so we manage the contract with Recology, who's our local hauler, and we also comply with the state laws for waste reduction and waste diversion. And so we're those people that were talking about in the last panel. We're trying to educate our community and get everyone knowing what we do here locally. We also manage compliance with stormwater laws. So we're keeping our creeks clean and keeping the trash and other pollutants out of the creeks and managing all the compliance side of that. And so I'm honored today to represent Cupertino and all the policy it's done over years to reduce waste and has focused on plastics in particular in a couple of ways. As the mayor already mentioned, we in 2013 restricted the use of the single-use carry-out plastic bags, those very thin hello bags we call them. They often said hello on them. And then in 2014 banned the expanded polystyrene, what we commonly refer to as styrofoam foodware. And both of those had a stormwater element. We were finding that those materials littered a lot, and so that was kind of a joint effort there. And we really did see a lot of improvement after those items were restricted in their use. And then in 2017, the city passed a zero waste policy, which has emphasized extended producer responsibility and acknowledged that reuse is going to be better than single use when you look at the life cycle. And then and actually specifically calls for reducing single-use foodware where possible. So we already had that kind of on the radar in 2017, and currently we're working on a new proposed single-use plastics ordinance to further restrict foodware and to pivot towards paper-based, fiber-based, which, as Bruce pointed out, doesn't necessarily, there's not really a winner in the single-use foodware space, but if we're using fiber-based products, we can then carry the food scraps and everything right into the compost here in Cupertino. Again, you got to look locally, right, for these, how you're doing it locally. San Jose is a totally different ballgame, but here we can accept that food-soiled paper product in with the compost. And so that's kind of where we're headed with our foodware restrictions on the policy side.
Great, thanks, Ursula.
Good morning, I'm Lloyd Holmes. I am the president of De Anza College, and I'm thrilled to join this panel this morning. And as I was sitting here listening to the previous two panelists, I was thinking that everything that I have to say, they've already said it. Because I think about this work from what is the role in education and what role do we play as an educational institution in providing individuals with the knowledge or the understanding of what is needed in this arena. And I think about the fact that when we think about policy, I oftentimes say policy is good to the extent to which people understand it and to the extent in which they comply with it. And so what role do we play as an educational institution or as educational institutions, beginning in K-12, what roles do they play in helping people to understand where we are and the direction that we need to go in, and what policies do we need to put in place, and how do we educate people about those policies? So that's the perspective that I'm coming from.
Great. Well, let's go backwards here. Dr. Holmes, what are some of the things that De Anza College is doing, or what are some of the things that you've done in the past? Because, of course, in the academic context, you're in a universe of very optimistic people, right? And so, but you're also in something of an enclosed system. It seems like there are often more opportunities sometimes to be able to say, hey, let's do this because it's good for the environment. And so I'd imagine you've probably had some experiences in the past and in the present where you're able to effectuate those policies.
Yes, so one of the things, we were one of the first schools in the nation to develop a sustainability plan. And I will say that when I came here as the president and was interviewing, there were some things that I was told in just about every setting were important to the institution. One was civic engagement, equity was important, and sustainability. Every single meeting that I went to, someone talked about sustainability and what the institution was doing to address sustainability efforts. In our cafeteria, back in 2008, they began to use Taterware. So we went away from plastic utensils that weren't biodegradable. Water bottles. We looked at that and began to sell water bottles that individuals could use at filling stations as opposed to single-use bottles. We're in the process of replacing our water fountains with those filler stations so that we're encouraging people to bring bottles. And so as an institution, we're saying that how do we use policy to really define our values, our philosophy, and how are we using policy to really create the culture of who we are, who we want to be, and then in addition to that, we're asking ourselves, how do we use our curriculum to really expand the work of sustainability. And so those are some of the things that we're doing. I probably could talk all day about, what
absolutely.
we're doing.
We could all go on, I think well over the half hour
Yeah.
or two, describe the individual efforts on just one, particular measure. But on that note, Ursula, we have, as you mentioned, a legislation teed up in Cupertino talking about another plastic ban, right? And not advertently, just because of the fact that we do have a lot on our agendas, this particular first reading of an ordinance has gotten delayed. We have it again on Tuesday. But I think about the space that we sit in. Carrie, our prior moderator, did mention Cupertino Library Foundation's involvement in thinking about connecting the kids with the design. If you go upstairs, if you stay with us for lunch, and then you hear the artists talk about the artwork from Recology Materials upstairs on the second floor, if you see the second floor, you can see the windows, and those windows have dots in them. And the reason those windows have dots in them is prior legislation of the Cupertino City Council. That's bird-safe, dark sky design so that birds are less likely to strike the windows. That came about as a lot of iterations of discussions. So Ursula, when you're looking at our current bag or plastic foodware, perhaps ban, perhaps regulation, where do you go in your kind of mental space as the person in our city thinking about kind of introducing and rolling this out, and knowing that, for instance, and this is a big example in Cupertino, that you probably have the most boba shops by any density anywhere in the world in this city. Yeah, I heard one clap. But of course, that is a particularly intensive use of that type of material. Are there any things that inform your kind of prognostication of what the efforts will look like on an outreach basis?
Yeah, it's so interesting. I think a lot about what Joey talked about and just the nexus of behavior and policy, because we can pass what we want to pass, but if you're not going to make it easy and understandable for people, it's going to be a struggle, right? And trying to understand the businesses and where they're at. So with the boba example, like Mayor Paul said, I think we are, we have a very high per capita boba, representation here, and we don't have anything against boba, and we understand that boba has a whole aesthetic to it and a whole experience, and you have the clear cup and you see the pearls and you have the sealed top, and it's a whole thing, and you're stabbing through the sealed top. And so from a policy perspective, that's a tough one to wrangle, and you don't want to rob people of an experience or rob an industry or this niche market. So trying to find a way forward there is tricky. There's not an easy solution necessarily, but we want to hear from these places that are doing these business and see if there's a way, can we enable some reusables, right? There are some kind of fun, cool reusable solutions out there. Could we get that kind of trending with some of the customers, right? If we can make it fun and interesting and cool and have it, as someone pointed out, we want to go towards something positive rather than just like, no, it's bad. Like, let's draw towards a positive solution that people could drift towards kind of naturally as consumers, right? So trying to find that nexus is always very tricky. And in the outreach, I'll just say quickly, I've really tried to go to these places and say, tell us your concerns. I'd rather hear about it now, right, soon, than try to pass something and then have people say, oh, no one asked us, So we really are trying to go, and we even had people, some of my staff going literally door to door, tell us, what you think about this. So it's always a challenge to reach everyone and hear the concerns. But that's where I come from. I want to hear the concerns. I want to try to find a solution where we can kind of move forward together towards something that meets all the needs.
Thanks, Ursula. And what was our giveaway, or one of them today?
Yeah, metal boba straw, so you can do all the boba sucking and stabbing and everything that you want to do. Hopefully you picked one up. So if you didn't, they have them at the registration table.
And was that complete with a cleaner for your straw as well?
Of course, we are all about the hygiene. So it has a little scrubby cleaner in there so you can keep cleaning and reusing your little straw forever and ever.
Excellent. Thank you, Ursula. And with that, Obai, I understand that Recology and some of your affiliates have, interestingly enough, a strong interest in a statewide initiative right now. We were talking about plastics 3 through 7 in our first panel, and the various levels of recyclability until you get to plastic 7, which apparently doesn't have much recyclability and adds to this high percentage of plastics that end up in the waste stream. Did you want to talk a little bit about those efforts to try to put forward the statewide initiative?
Sure. So Recology, back a couple years ago now, worked together with our other industry leaders, Waste Management, Republic, to put together a ballot initiative that we would help to meet the state's efforts by 2035, but our goal is 2030 to reduce about 25% of single-use plastics that get thrown to the waste stream. This also included opportunities to provide for local and state governments in their efforts to also reduce plastics locally as well. In the city of Los Angeles, they have actually worked on something very similar around the LA County to stop at the local food, it's like food vendors. They normally use styrofoam, containers, and so they've actually have kind of mirrored what we're working on at the state level locally to mitigate their plastics use and consumption even sooner. I think theirs is around 2027. So in a nutshell, that's pretty much like the objective for where we're at right now. And the work that also needs to be done isn't, merely just what we've been able to put onto the ballot, but is also understanding where people are at the moment. We are facing a climate emergency that we have never seen before in this country and around the world. And by us getting together, especially in the state of California, to look at policies, look at opportunities in which we can be not just industry leaders with Recology, but world leaders, along with the other broader groups like Sweden and a lot of the Nordic countries that we've seen, we can truly see a reduction and ensure that we have a healthier, cleaner future.
Quick follow-up on that, Obai. As a waste management company, why would Recology be interested in reducing the amount of waste that we have?
Well, a big chunk of our company's motto is waste zero. San Francisco I think we are now finally one of the first zero trash producing cities in the country. And right now, we want to make sure that other parts of our state, starting here in the state of California, are able to, meet that same goals, meet those same efforts. If you talk to any major city, they all are trying to figure out ways in which they can mitigate and reduce their plastic use and consumption. And really, it's going to be something that goes on to the producer side. The producers have to be, a part of this effort, or we're going to constantly have these relapses and a proliferation of single-use plastics that get thrown to the waste stream, create these byproducts like PFAS and all these other nasty things that we don't want. So that's part of the big reason why. It's part of our vision, it's part of who we are as a company, and it's what we understand that, the broader communities that we serve want to see happen as well.
Very interesting. Well, thank you, Obai. And it does kind of harken back to a comment made in our first panel about you make it, you take it, I think by Professor Olszewski. And really the question, I think, becomes how do you get industry to get invested in that? Is it a matter of legislation? I know legislation is often a struggle. It's a process, certainly. With regard to that, thoughts on the various types of legislation that are out there, Nick, right now, and what your organization has been doing. I don't mean to put it all on you, but if we're hearing 9%, right, was the recycling before, and we're at 6% now, what is it that we need to be doing to kind of connect those dots policy-wise? Are there certain types of laws that we should be focusing on? What gets us to that better endpoint?
Yeah, I really appreciate that prompt because that's what I was going to talk about anyway, no matter what the question was going to be. Our priority for this year is really passing the ballot measure that Obai talked about, because it takes a holistic approach to dealing with this issue. And if you're listening over the last couple panels, I think there are a couple of takeaways. One of the takeaways is from the first panel of we know that there are things we can do that work. And it's not necessarily simple. It's not necessarily a single silver bullet thing we can do. But Sally with PRCC is a perfect example of what we need to be doing with other packaging types. It's an industry-created organization that, in response to legislation, is getting PET bottles recycled. And it's a combination of the fact that we have a deposit on those bottles, so consumers have an incentive to bring it back so they get their nickel back. A combination of the fact that we have a recycled content mandate where bottlers are required to use recycled PET. A combination of the fact that we have what she described as the processing fee, where manufacturers have to pay to the state the net cost of recycling their product. And so the higher the value of the product, the less that net cost is, the less they have to pay. We also use some of the unredeemed money from the bottle bill to support those 6 reclaiming facilities that she talked about. So we pay them per ton that they recycle. And so it's a very complicated, I was thinking of there's a puzzle over there by the entrance, and it really is about finding all the puzzle pieces that go together on the back end and making sure that the economics make sense for the smart station to put in a AI robot to pick out a specific material. That's on the back end. On the front end, I think what you heard in the second panel is it's got to be dead simple, right? We can't count on the people who are going to go out of their way to figure out what type of plastic their bag is and to take it back to the one Walmart, in the 4-county area that it takes back the plastic. That just isn't going to work. We've got to make it simple. We've got to have it a social norm. We've got to make it convenient. And really, we do have that contrast. And I'm sorry, I'm going on a little bit.
No, please.
But we do really have that contrast between the 5% recycling rate nationally for plastic and the 70% recycling rate for PET bottles in California. And fundamentally, the trick isn't that we've been telling people to figure out what type of bottle, what type of material their bottle is made out of and take it back somewhere really complicated and do this and that. We made a standardized system where every manufacturer uses the same materials, right? They all use PET for their soft drink bottles, HDPE for their jugs, aluminum for their cans, glass for their bottles. They're all interrecyclable together. You walk down the aisle at the store, you're not making any kind of decision about, for the most part, with some exceptions like Capri Sun or something, you're not really making a decision about what's recyclable, and it all goes in your home bin, and we have markets for it here. And that's really what we need for other types of packaging. We've got to shift to a simpler system that has fewer types of packaging where the manufacturers are actually buying it back and making the new products out of it. We don't need 18 different materials to make clear clamshell containers out of, right? It's a system problem. It's not a consumer problem.
Great. Okay. Well, these are really just profoundly interesting questions. We have about 6 minutes left. I do want to be able to open it up to people that have questions here. And so just a show of hands, would anyone like to ask questions of our panel? Okay, so we do have a number of, so please make your way up to the front. I'll just ask a speed round of questions for our panelists here. So thinking about this, okay, we did have a good comment from a scientist on our second panel with regard to thinking about how the science can talk to industry, the optical readers, PLA versus PET. That was great to hear, right? Because we know that we probably don't need to legislate that, right? But to the extent that we can promote that type of conversation and those types of policies, what do you find most important about all of this and the type of balance that we're talking about? Is it going to be legislation? Is it going to be behavioral understanding? Is it going to be the science? And we'll start with you, Nick.
I say legislation because that's what I do day in, day out.
All right, fair answer. Fair answer. Oh, bye.
Yeah, I also would say legislation.
Okay. All right.
What I'm thinking of is not giving us materials that we can't recycle, sort of I was going to say, amen, but like with the PLA issue, we actually don't want PLA in our compost here locally. And in California, it's kind of problematic. I think it's better in other parts of the country, but it looks identical to PET. So
what do you do?
That's confusing the consumer. We're not all supposed to be material scientists to just like go buy, a cup or whatever, right? So
that sounds like
keep it simple.
legislation to me. All right. And Lloyd, Dr. Holmes.
Yeah, I would say that legislation gets to the source of the problem that we have. So, yeah. legislation.
Okay. Well, why don't we come on up? If you're interested, there's a microphone over there if you'd like to ask a question of our panel. In the meantime, I will posit the idea that, perhaps legislation, if it's too heavy-handed, right, it ends up getting some pushback from, understandable pushback from the economic atmosphere out there. Welcome.
Oh, hello. Hi, my name is Sudha. I'm a resident of Cupertino.
Welcome, Sudha.
And I'm very happy to be here because this is something which is really close to my heart and the family as well. So it's very heartening to see the problem of plastics being, attacked from so many various angles. But one thing that I would really like to ask Mayor Paul is, you did mention briefly that the school districts were also involved in this.
Yes.
But I don't see a lot of it coming back home in terms of just knowledge from my kids or what's being enforced in school or even just education or awareness. So is there anything that the city is doing or the school districts are doing? See, we do our part by educating them at home.
Mm-hmm.
But like you said, unless it's a school policy, unless it is enforced, I don't know if enforce is the right word, but just awareness. So are we doing anything to make children more aware because they are the future?
Oh, absolutely. Well, thank you for the question, Sudha. And I hate to call it a bit of a softball pitch, but we have such a nice community here. This event right here, of course, we've actually gotten every school district in Cupertino involved. And I was very happy to hear that, similar to our council, there was unanimous support for these types of conversations. I think I'm familiar with, on the more serious side, some of those pushbacks. And for every single issue that we have, especially the ones that are more serious and a bit more intractable, we have so many committed people in the community, and they want to push. They want to push at the high school district. They want to be able to say, hey, are we doing more things? Can we have more of these conversations? And I think, the exercise that we're engaged in right now, it will get recorded and pushed out to the public on the website, webpage for the city. We can encourage these types of conversations to keep on happening, but certainly you have a partner in the city with regard to being able to bring these types of issues to the forefront. I would like to bring it over to Dr. Holmes, given the fact that he's president of really the higher Institute of Learning in Cupertino. So, Dr. Holmes, did you have thoughts on that?
I mean, I would just say that it truly is extremely important that, as I mentioned earlier, from K-12 up, beginning at kindergarten, we've got to begin to teach our students what it is that we think they need to do so that they do indeed bring that home. I oftentimes say that education opens a lot of eyes for a lot of people, and it can be the great equalizer. And I think that we have to really begin to think about what policies are we putting in place in our school districts at the college level that really promote our desire to be more sustainable. And that's what we're doing at De Anza, and saying here's what our expectations are. This is who we are, and we're telling people sustainability is important to us. And then, besides saying that it's important, what are the specific actions that we're putting in place that prove to people that sustainability is important? And when people come on campus, what are they seeing so that they know that sustainability is important to us? I mean, even our trash cans. We're very clear that sustainability is important to us from the trash cans that we use. Yeah.
Thanks, Lloyd.
Actually, just the concrete examples that you gave for De Anza College was, if we could do something akin to that for schools, right, where we reduce the single-use plastic in the packaging, in the school cafeteria, things like that. Right, so it'll be good.
Thank you, Sudha. Let's go on. I think Ursula, you had a quick comment.
Just a quick comment that I talked to the food services manager at CUSD about this topic, and they have some challenges, but they are very interested in finding solutions. And one of the challenges, they don't have any dishwashers at schools, and there's actually, I believe, a state bill that's under consideration to enable more dishwashing at schools. So they're interested, and there's room to grow there, I think.
Thank you, Ursula, and that's a great segue. Nick, I saw you nodding your head. Did you have any thoughts from Californians Against Waste on the legislative level and the state level?
Yeah, I was just agreeing. So there is a bill that would help fund dishwashers for schools to help them transition back to reusables, which used to be the norm, but now most have shifted to disposables. There's also another bill requiring water refill stations in schools as well.
Okay, great. Well, I don't want to end this with just a set of answers, because this is not about a set of answers. We do have 2 more members of the public. If you could just pose your questions, and then we'll leave it at that, and then conclude our speaking for today. And I'll remind everyone that we do have lunch over in Community Hall. We have congregation time between now and lunch, and of course we can break bread and continue the discussion on these issues. So please come on up and share your questions with
Hi
us.
everyone, I am Preeti. I'm a Cupertino resident. Very excited to be here. I was very interested in the behavioral aspect that was discussed as well. And my question was, is there a vision? You know, how in PG&E we see like your usage is more than this other average person in your community. Do we foresee getting a letter in the mail that, hey, the way you're dividing your garbage is probably a lot worse than how it should be?
Interesting question. Well, thank you, Preeti. And let's conclude with a final member of the audience that'd like to ask a question.
Hello, my name is Karuna. I'm a high school student at Homestead High School. I remember like the mentioning of like making this process simplified for like students and sort of members of the public, and how do you sort of hope to do this going forward? Because I do sort of see a gap between like my knowledge and like what's really necessary to be done to help with problems such as plastic usage.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much. Well, let's have a big round of applause for our panelists and for ourselves today.
We have, as we've been talking about, 2 artists in residence who have worked at Recology's transfer station up in San Francisco. And we have Deborah Monk, who is I don't know what your actual title is, but I know you're in charge of the artists. So we wanted to welcome Deborah up to introduce the artists in a more coherent way than I can do. And so we will welcome her up now, and then we will hear from the artists themselves. And then we encourage you to stick around and go back over to the library and check out their installation of art on the 2nd floor. Deborah, come on down.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mayor Paul, John Zarelli, and then the library. This is like the most beautiful library I've seen in a long time. So thank you for inviting us. My name is Deborah Monk, and I'm the manager of the Artist in Residence program at Recology in San Francisco. We've had an Artist in Residence program for 30 years, and we invite artists to come out. We pay them a stipend. They take materials from the trash, or they respond to the trash. And they're there for 4 months, and then at the end of their residency, they have an exhibition. It's amazing. So if you're ever in San Francisco, please come and visit us. But after I speak, or after the artists speak, we're going to go upstairs and see some of the work that has been made. And I focused on, when I was choosing art here, I focused on artists who specifically were using plastics. And so Kathy Aoki and Alicia Escott, both wonderful artists that I had the pleasure of spending 4 months with. Kathy will talk about her work with styrofoam. It doesn't look like styrofoam. It's a long, involved process that she used to make it. And Alicia is an expert on plastics. So if you have any questions about plastics or the environment, Alicia can answer those questions. So Kathy, come on up.
Hi everyone, I'm very happy to be here. My name is Kathy Aoki and I'm an artist, and I was very pleased to watch the inspiring videos. And so one way that I do my part is to make artwork from recycled materials, which wasn't really a focus of my art practice before I went to Recology. So Recology really changed my life and my ideas about how to approach making artwork. So you can see here, one of these pieces is in the library right now, which is the one that looks like a stone lipstick. And advance here. Whoops. And this is part of my installation at Recology in the final show. So what you see here looks like it's made out of stone and granite, but all of those things I could pick up and move myself. So if you, some of these images are about kind of beauty. So I use like historical looks and art history looks to make comments on today's society, in particular about gender issues and beauty expectations. And in this case, these are disgraced patriarchal monuments that I have in a garden with pigeons on them. And so a lot of this was made with styrofoam. And since I couldn't really bring myself to make a monument like to mansplaining, which is what the centerpiece is, a mansplaining statue. And in my presentation, I said I found these in the trash. So I give a fake like huge it's like I'm a curator in a museum, and like we just found these at Recology in the trash, but I made all of these items. So there's like a mansplaining statue in the center with a pigeon on its shoulder. And if you look at it from the back, though, you can see I just couldn't bring myself to make the whole monument. I just kind of made it as a stage set. And so if you look close up, you can see that it's pieces of styrofoam that I've glued together. And that yellow stuff is the glue, which is big stuff insulation that comes out of a can. So it's a polyurethane foam, which I also found at the dump. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about my process. As an artist in resident, you see a huge pile, and this is, I'd say like 1/50th of the pile that you see in this huge transfer station. So this is a very big room, but the transfer station is like 10 times or maybe even 15 times bigger than this, a huge open space with this huge pile, and cars are coming in and trucks are coming in and going all the time. And as an artist in resident, you wear a hard hat and like steel-toed boots with like puncture-resistant soles, and you walk in, and then when you see stuff you like, you have to quick go and grab it before the next car comes and like unloads their stuff. So you have maybe like 1 minute to 6 minutes or something to really kind of scope out stuff and haul it out with your special gloved hands into like a shopping cart, and then we cart it back to our artist studio. So there's all kinds of materials in there. So these are materials that people drive in. It's not what comes out of the garbage truck. It's like what people drive in, like when their parents, move out of the house, or like a business just had a big display. And so there was a lot of styrofoam there. And Recology does recycle a lot of the styrofoam if it's clean and easy to trim. And they can put it through a machine and make what would be like molding pieces for like interior architectural accents and picture frames. But some of the material also is just like a weird shape or was used on a stage set, and so it's just not, they can't recycle that. So there was a large amount of material for me to work with. So this is like the corner of my studio where I've gathered up some things that you can see later became the sculptures. Whoops. And this is the piece that I have in the library next door. So I used a recycled cardboard tube and made the shape, and that base is a found wooden column, which makes me kind of sad. It was like a chunk of wooden column that was used probably in a business for a display, but obviously like was the top of some grand column from someone's like house that they just chopped down into little bits and pieces. And then I, to strengthen the piece, I put a construction material on it, which is a fiberglass netting. And so this was to increase the structural integrity. And then I made paper mache from recycled materials that I found there. And that included paper and, buckets of unused joint compound, which is what you use to smooth the joins between sheets of sheetrock, white glue, and then also a little flour. So I found a lot of paper there in the stream, and I used Recology's probably recycled paper cutter that they found also to make little bits and pieces, and then I made this glue slurry, and then I would apply it to the styrofoam and allow it to harden. So this is what it looks like after the material's been applied, and it already looked kind of rocky, so I didn't do a lot of sanding to it, but you could sand down this material and make it quite smooth. So I have several other, and then afterwards I faux painted it so that it looked like stone. So these are with found acrylic paint. So at Recology, they do separate out art materials when they find them, so artists can go and kind of look in a giant bin for oil paints or acrylics. So that's how I made the piece here. But this is another example. You can see I took very small bits of styrofoam that might not get to be recycled because of their original form, and then that's a mannequin head that I found, and then I covered this over with paper mache, and then I put it inside of a diorama. So this is like you're looking at a picture frame that leads into a hole in the wall, and inside was this beauty sphinx, and in this diorama, women approach the beauty sphinx to find out the secret to true beauty, and then they get riddled like kind of a dumb beauty question. Like in this case, it says, is it proper to wear chapstick under lipstick? And the women who visit this beauty sphinx always get it wrong, and then they die. So it was like a video of these like women approaching the sphinx over and over again. Here's another sphinx related to beauty. This one is the very rough stages, and then this is what it looked like when it was done. I didn't even bother paper macheing this one. I just like painted it and allowed like the texture of the styrofoam to simulate rock. So you know, I say that this was a maquette for larger sphinxes that were found at the time. When they wanted to kind of upgrade the beauty trends on their sphinxes, they would like work on this maquette before applying it to the large stone sphinxes. And then in this final image, this is again the Garden of Disgraced Patriarchal Monuments. So the piece on the left is a virilitas vase, and so virilitas is like Latin for virility. And that was a large piece of foam with paper mache on it. And then the mansplaining and marble-like sculpture in back, which has the text always on top, on the base of it, was made with construction adhesive applied to the outside, and it made kind of a smooth matte texture that I also faux painted. In the background, there are bits of plastic, like, okay, not like a ton of plastic that is like floral elements. So a lot of the materials might be used for just like a wedding or some kind of singular event. So there were a lot of fake flowers that I found and plastic flowers. And then there's also some real foliage that I found. So this was a combination. And so I'm happy to say I like took all these materials back with me after the residency, and we'll be using some of these fake flowers and leaves and such in an upcoming show I'm having at the new Museum Los Gatos in July. So I continue to use the materials that I found from this one event. And so that's it for me. Thank you. And are there any questions? Yes. Okay, those are two very good questions. So the first was a compliment. Thank you, that it looks like marble. And I actually have a stone consultant. So I hired an expert who makes rock formations, and she made them for the Oakland Museum of California. And I said, I need to learn how to make fake rock look right. So she's someone that I worked with before. And so she gave me some tips on how to make fake marble and what colors to use. And even gave me a recipe for like pigeon poop, which I like didn't really apply very much of, but used zinc white instead of titanium white. And the second question is this a hobby for me, or can I support myself through the work? So it's not a hobby. It's my whole career is based on being a professional artist, but I do teach. So I teach at Santa Clara University, and I teach how to make things on the computer and also printmaking. So actually not sculpture, although this show is really all sculpture. And so I think I invest a lot of life energy into this. And if I don't make work, I can't have my job. So it's fully integrated together. And most of my works, though, are not available in commercial galleries. So for example, Recology, I got a stipend to do this project, and I've had shows at like the San Jose Institute of Contemporary Art where they gave me a stipend to make an installation. So I've been working mostly with nonprofits and not so much with commercial galleries. I think in order to see my work effectively, it's kind of an immersive experience, and so that's something where I feel like nonprofits or like museum spaces that are funky and those kinds of are more amenable to allowing me to take over the space and put in these fictional narratives. Okay, thank you so much. And if you have more questions, I'm happy to talk to you after Alicia speaks and we go look at the work in person. So here's Alicia Scott. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy. Actually, can we switch over to the keynote? while we're doing that, I just want to also follow up on what Kathy was saying and say how happy I am to be here and to say how honored I am to be here representing Recology. And this question about making a living off of art, it's a huge struggle to be an artist, especially in the Bay Area where it's so expensive, and it's incredible. It just takes a few institutions to really sustain artists and keep culture locally, and Recology does an incredible job of doing that by providing opportunity, by providing material, space. Space is a big issue in the Bay Area, and providing a livable wage, while you're in residence there. So, and they also do a great job of continuing to be in community with their artists. Deborah invited me here to share work with you guys and talk with you all, hopefully. So, unlike a lot of the artists in residence who come to Recology, I've actually been working with discarded materials and specifically single-use plastics for a very, very, very long time in my work. So this could be a very long lecture. I'll keep it short, but I could keep going. And but there were so many ways that it changed being at Recology. So I'm going to start with talking about, or with this quote by Gregory Bateson, because I think this quote kind of points to both issues around waste management and how we deal with essentially the byproducts of contemporary capitalist consumer materials, but also about the shift of consciousness that I think that we really need to embrace if we're going to move forward into a future that's livable for us all. So you decide that you want to get rid of the byproducts of a human life and that Lake Erie will be a good place to put them. You forget that the eco-mental system called Lake Erie is a part of your wider eco-mental system, and that if Lake Erie is driven insane, its insanity is incorporated into the larger system of your thoughts and experience. So a lot of my work comes down then to what is it to live in this moment that is kind of insane? To know that I've been making work on plastic for over 15 years. 15 years ago, we knew about the Great Garbage Patch. We knew about the failures in recycling. So what is it to be here at this time? So my work at Recology was called Now the Totality Hits Us First in Oracle. And I'll talk about the Oracle more in a little bit, but I want to just talk about now the totality hits us first. I think that's where we're at in recognizing where things are at with climate change. It's hard to enjoy a sunny day like this without seeing that so clearly. But kind of on a lighter note, we still have so much beauty. There's such a beautiful world that we still have. And being at Recology, I was really struck by how beautiful it is out there. It's so strange. You wouldn't think the place that houses are dumped would be such a gorgeous place, but it really is. And so I started researching why is that, and started researching the history of the land there. And I found out that the area that Recology is on is home to this snake. This is the San Francisco garter snake. It's considered one of the most beautiful snakes in the world. And it lives right here. It is endangered, and so I started making a drawing of it on this this thrown-out plastic container or package. And the outgoing artist in residence was like, "Okay, this is how it works at Recology. The pile. If you need something, you just write it down and ask the pile, and it'll be there tomorrow." And I was like, "Oh, okay, that's interesting." And so I'm working late into the studio at the night and drawing this snake and these beautiful iconic colors. And I start putting this electrical wire in through the middle of it. I'm like, oh, that's kind of interesting. Maybe tomorrow I'll see if I can find some electrical wire in the specific colors of this snake that are very iconic. So I come in the next day and there are giant industrial grade cabling of exactly those colors, no other colors, just those. And it was this awakening, okay, this is how this works. This is this. Okay, I guess that's what I'm doing. And so that's kind of faded out. But I made a lot of drawings of this snake, as well as the whole ecology around ricology. In this one, you can't see it well, it's a little blown out, but my hand is crawling inside of that plastic bag, and I'm kind of caressing the snake, which sort of in turn caresses me. And I make drawings on plastic, and then they become sculptures, and then they become videos. But ricology was really amazing because the videos became sculptures in themselves, and thinking about the totality of the materials that we're using and being kind of honest about those. So I made a lot of drawings of this San Francisco garter snake. And I was thinking a lot when I was there about precarity, connectivity, entanglements. And this is kind of an install shot. And started researching, more than just that, but the whole ecology around ricology. And it turns out that right next to ricology is San Bruno Mountain. And San Bruno Mountain is in between here and San Francisco. It's a place I highly recommend you visit. But it's been written about by E.O. Wilson as one of the biological hotspots of the planet. Turns out it's intimately tied to ricology and the history of that land as being a dumping ground, because back in the 40s, that area was not developed because of a historical dumping in that area. There was a stench that came off of it that kept developers at bay long enough for the Endangered Species Act to be established in 1972, and then for them to find that there are all of these endangered butterflies up on that mountain. So in a strange way, sort of the worst of us is saving the best of us in this, the fact that there is all this dumping, which later became a recycling facility, but saves this beautiful intact habitat. So in these works, I'm thinking about connectivity, the movement of information. So those were detail shots with drawings of some of these endangered butterflies, and that's again that install shot. I also was growing the host species for those butterflies within discarded materials. So those are flowers growing out of a microwave. And then I was thinking a lot about precarity. And I wanted the installation, this sort of microecology that I made, to feel like it could just blow away at any minute. And so each of these sculptures, however, they all have very detailed drawings on them. That's the California red-legged frog, which is actually what the San Francisco garter snake eats. So again, that's a drawing on plastic, and each of those has these sort of drawings embedded in them, so that but they feel like they could just blow away at any moment. So again, precarity, these works were, just placed so that they felt like they could topple over at any moment. And this idea of entanglements and how, oftentimes a species that goes extinct is oftentimes like a niche species that isn't necessarily a keystone species to its environment. It's not, the whole environment is not dependent on that. But because these species are entangled with human systems, that gets a little bit messier. And so this checkerstone butterfly, even though it may not be so essential for its whole ecology, it's endangered, and so it's afforded these legal protections that then end up protecting the whole ecosystem around it. And so this piece is called "How to Become a Keystone Species," and thinking about that entanglement of human systems and ecological systems. So that's just an installation of that. That show. Again, I'm growing things out of it. And, my later work since that has really been informed by this sort of entangled installation aesthetic. So I think you can see that here. There are some drawings of grizzly bear paws in there. There's also lots of drawings of acorns. This is a different installation. During the pandemic, I was drawing an acorn a day to kind of meditate on possibility and the possibilities inherent in a seed and the possibilities for growth, and thinking about the social justice movements arising out of that. But also thinking about fire and fire ecologies. And again, in the 15 years that I've been working with plastic, more than half the plastic ever produced in the history of the earth has been created. And so the rapid climate change that's caused by the oil industry, which plastic has historically been a byproduct of, is causing hotter and more frequent forest fires, in which the forests themselves can no longer be counted on as carbon sinks, but potentially sources of carbon release. And so thinking about how do we navigate this? And I want to highlight here the historically a byproduct of, because a lot of these oil companies, they know that it's the end of fossil fuels, so they're pushing plastics, and they're actually in single-use plastics, and they're actually making oil refineries just for the purpose of single-use plastics, and the pandemic has only accelerated that. So how do we navigate the tension between possibility and desperation? I think those are sort of the times, because we do have such a beautiful world that we can still save. So again, these are plants that I'm growing as sculptures within my installations, and they're all native species, totally drought tolerant. They feed local ecologies. And one thing we've learned is that, regenerating soil health is one way that we can really directly sequester carbon. Here we are, Cupertino, it's the center of technology, but the technologies that we really have that we can put to scale are the ones that we've always had. So again, this is one of those sculptures in full bloom. And there it is, after its life cycle. I want to highlight that microplastics have now been found in human blood. They've been found in the bottom of our oceans. They're in our ecosystems. I found them in the compost that I work with. There are little bits of plastic in that. And just again to highlight compost, it's such an amazing thing. And the nitrogen cycle disruption is a sister to the carbon cycle. And if we can have long, deep roots, and we can have better soil, we can get through this. And compost is a way, and thank God Recology does, have city compost, because that is a way to make recycling real and a reality. Okay, I'm going to end on that. Thank you all.